All right. Well, welcome to the first of what we hope is going to be many podcasts. We've got our two special guests here today. Managing partner Chris Karagounis from Alex Kaar. I am Chris Hughes, partner for the Marketing Communications Division of Alex Kaar, and our very special guest, incoming CEO of Deliveroo, Mr. Ed McManus. Welcome, Ed.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about all things life and leadership. You're a guy who's had a pretty amazing journey. Chris and I have been lucky to know Ed for many years now, and we've appointed you. You've been a client, you've been a candidate, and above all, you've been a good friend. So, Ed, I'm keen to know, and to give some context to the people listening to this, what your journey has been like so far. Maybe a brief kind of overview of your career to date.
Sure. Well, I started my career as a medical research scientist when I was a little kid. I thought being a scientist would be really cool. And so I did that for a few years. I did a PhD in biochemistry and then went on to be a medical research scientist in a lab. And then decided that I would do something else. An opportunity came along to join GlaxoSmithKline, which is the British multinational pharmaceutical company. And really, that was a tremendous break for me, getting into that business, because they really focused on people development, training, and things like that. So it was a great place for me to start my corporate career, if you like. I was there for 5 years, did a whole bunch of roles, but moved into sales, marketing, commercial roles. I then had an opportunity to go and join the REA Group here in Australia, which many people will know, but for those who don't, it's the business that runs realestate.com.au. And I spent a little over 3 years there. Again, tremendously lucky to spend time in that business. It was at the time, and still is, very, very fast-growing, successful, I would argue one of Australia's most successful digital businesses, and worked with some tremendous leaders and people there. At that point, I had the opportunity to go into the energy industry, which seemed hugely exciting, and energy is something that people know is very topical in the news all the time. And I had an opportunity to go and run Meridian Energy's Australian operations. So Meridian Energy is a very large New Zealand business, and in Australia we ran hydropower stations, wind farms, and a retail business which sells electricity called Power Shop. That was a growing brand at that time. So 5 years there in a wonderful business with wonderful people in a very exciting industry. That takes us up to a couple of months ago, and Deliveroo came along. Deliveroo is a food business. Many people will know it. Those who don't, we deliver food to your door on time, high quality. And I joined there 4 weeks ago as CEO of Australian operations.
You're still a pretty young guy. I mean, you're what, 30,
Thank you.
33, 34?
Oh, yeah, it's the good looks. I'm just over 40.
Okay. Have you ever felt ready for your next role, or has it been a case of just bite off more than you can chew?
Certainly in the early years, I never felt ready. And I think what I would encourage people who are listening to think about is if you don't feel ready and you're nervous and you're, not sleeping a little bit at night, you probably are ready. If you're awake 4 times at night, then you're probably not, right? But a little bit of nervousness and unease, I think that's normal. In fact, I think if you feel completely comfortable, it's the wrong role for you. There's got to be an edginess to it. In more recent years, as you get a bit more experience, a bit more confident, less so, I've kind of felt, ready for roles. But certainly in the early years, I think, no, you shouldn't feel ready. And I think this is an important topic because my experience, and this is just my anecdotal personal experience, having hired many people internally and externally into roles I've been in, almost all the time, if you ask a man, do you feel ready? The answer is yes. And if you ask a woman, do you feel ready? The answer is no. I'm not necessarily saying those words, do you feel ready? But that type of questioning, I think there is something that holds women back. Not all women, of course. And of course, not all men will be confident to go for a role. But on average, there's a difference. And I think that's something leaders need to be aware of But personally, not ready in the early years of more recent times. I've probably felt more confident and ready.
Thanks, Ed. You've worked for a lot of people over the years. I'd be really keen to understand which leaders have helped shape who you are today, and of those leaders, which ones are you most grateful of?
Yeah, look, it's been a privilege for me to work with so many strong people. I mean, in the early years, I had some breaks given to me by many people. Arthur Chalaftis is one example, who hired me to do a very big job at an early point in my career. At GlaxoSmithKline, I was running the respiratory portfolio, which was the company's biggest line of business, if you like. And on paper, honestly, I wasn't qualified. And I know there were other people up for that job who were. And so, I was asked to apply, and I thought, going back to the question about do you feel ready, I was asked to apply, and I thought, well, there's no way I'm ready. I can't do this job. But I'll apply anyway. I've got nothing to lose, and I'll go for it. And I think, then you sort of, that nothing to lose attitude is important. You can be a bit bolder maybe in an interview. Maybe I was. Maybe I just put some risky ideas out there. And Arthur gave me an opportunity. And that was a big, big step in my career. There are other people through the journey. Greg Ellis at REA Group is one of the strongest strategic leaders I've ever come across. Very decisive. And I think being decisive is important as a leader. So I've learned a huge amount from him. And there are numerous others. But I think the characteristics, people who take a chance, who don't take the obvious, easy route, take a chance on people, do things differently in terms of tactics and initiatives, are decisive, see a vision and can bring people on that journey in terms of painting a path to get somewhere where otherwise it would appear almost impossible. Those are the sorts of characteristics I think I've enjoyed. And also people who've given me space. You don't want someone who's right over your shoulder day to day. Hopefully I'm not that myself.
So we know Arthur well, of course, and I know what you mean, and I agree with you. Obviously, he's not here for me to ask him the question, but what, in your words, what did he see in you twice? Particularly the first time when you agreed that you weren't qualified. What did he see in you by way of qualities and competencies that you didn't see in yourself?
They're probably the things that I look for in other people. A sense of curiosity, always thinking about things differently. Listening to podcasts or reading books or listening to an interview on TV, whatever it is, and thinking, oh, that's quite interesting. How could I think about that little lesson and apply that to what I'm doing? So a sense of curiosity. And I think there has to be a chemistry. Again, it's a bit like playing doubles tennis. So if you're playing doubles tennis with somebody, I'm not really a tennis player, by the way, but just for the example, if you're playing doubles tennis with somebody regularly, you build up a sense of a chemistry so that when a ball gets lobbed over the net, you don't need to ask your partner who's going for that ball. It just happens, right? And you start to know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And I've been lucky over the years to have that sense of chemistry, both with managers I've had and with people reporting to me. And I think if you can get that, then, tremendous things do happen.
Obviously, you've had some great success in your career to date, but we often learn more from our failures than we do our successes. I'm curious to know, what are the big standout moments, and I'm sure they'll be able to jump to mind pretty quickly, where you've failed but learnt as a result?
They're mostly people-related things rather than businesses and initiatives and products. If I think back over the years, I made some bad people calls. I don't want to go into the specifics, but I hired some wrong people. I probably didn't stand up for certain things that were important to people in my team, for example. Probably didn't jump on some issues, some people-related issues quick enough in some circumstances. And I often think now, if I had my brain now to go back to those days, knowing what I know today and apply that, I would have acted differently. So there's small things in the scheme of things, but they were very important at that time. And that stuff's hard, you know. I mean, we all operate differently as individuals. Everybody's got things going on in their personal life that you don't necessarily know about at the time. Circumstances change, and so I've certainly made some mistakes in those areas.
And as a leader of large groups of people, what kind of behaviours do you try and exude that demonstrate your values and the kind of behaviours that you like to see reflected back from the people that work for you?
It's a hard question, Chris, because you're trying to distill. You need a huge diversity of skill sets, thoughts, backgrounds to deliver something meaningful. So it's a balance always between setting standards and you know, the way you put it, exuding values, and yet letting people express their individualism. And as a leader, that's a tough balance to get right. But coming to your question, in terms of the sorts of values I like to see from people, I think hard work is number one. I once heard Alex Ferguson, the former Manchester United manager, talk about the fact that hard work is a talent. It is a talent. I mean, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and starting to think about work, and if you've got kids, dealing with kids in the morning, you've got, you know, maybe parents that you're caring for, whatever it is you've got going on in your life, doing that, getting that done takes energy, then getting out to work, pushing all the time for a better result, trying to be better every day, more effective than you were the previous day, requires tremendous hard work. And I think that is a talent that not everyone has. And sometimes that's misunderstood. We kind of talk about work-life balance and things, which maybe we'll come on to. So I think that's one. People who are willing to take risk. I mean, both, you know, separate them slightly, but they're overlapping, professional and personal risk. I mean, the easiest thing in corporate world is keep your head down. You don't want people who keep their head down. You want people who are pushing the boundaries and coming to you as a leader going, listen, I think you're wrong on that. And I think what you said there was wrong, and I think you should deal with that differently, or we should try this thing over here where we're launching something out into this area in this way. I don't think that's right. So you want people who come back and deliver honest feedback and tell you as a leader what's really going on. So that requires them to take some personal risk. It requires a backbone. It requires character. That's super important.
Do you think that's kind of the behaviours that we've bred by creating these big, you know, national or multinational organisations where people are encouraged and celebrated and rewarded for fitting in as opposed to trying to stand out?
Look, I remember, I won't say which company because people could figure out the individual, but I remember at one of the companies I've been at, there was an individual who was one of the most innovative, hard-working, creative characters in terms of creating new business and entrepreneurial and all the things that we talk about that you want. I don't think he would have survived in a major corporate because he was different. I mean, really different. You know, he sort of wouldn't have necessarily always followed procedures on things and that sort of stuff. So I think that's a telling example because in the world of vanilla, people like that don't survive. So to a certain extent, we've got to look at that.
Just to digress a little bit, father of 3 young kids.
Yes.
And first child, Orla, was born how many years ago?
8.
8. So 8 years ago. So in the 8 years since Orla was born, 2 other children have been born as well.
Yep.
One recently.
So 8 months.
8 months ago.
And the other one is 4.
And 4.
Almost
so
4.
Obviously very hands-on, and you are a hands-on dad. And in that time, you've also achieved a lot work-wise through the REA, being consistently promoted, picking up the big role at Meridian, and then even bigger now with Deliveroo. What advice would you give to young executives coming through that have those family obligations? Because from where Chris and I sit, we virtually everybody that we talk to, or most people, are balancing senior careers, often 2 careers, the couple at home, young kids. What advice do you give to them on balancing all that pressure?
Look, I'll tell you what I think, and this might not be popular. In fact, I don't know if you saw in the news the last few days, there was results of a survey were published where, mums and dads find working and kids hard. Well, I mean, what did they think it was going to be easy? I mean, really? It's tremendously difficult. And it's very difficult to have a successful corporate career and be a good mum or a good dad and be there all the time for what they need. And I'm not going to give advice in this, give advice from a standing of me getting it right, because I don't get it right a lot of the time. There have been periods through my career where my marriage has suffered, and there have been periods where my obligations to my children have suffered. Because, the two things operate on different tempos and different timelines. And I suppose the advice would be, to people to say, well, consider what you want very carefully. And don't believe, look, when I say this, I mean, absolutely we need to strive for work-life balance. Absolutely we need to strive for flexible workplaces. And I've been a champion of that everywhere I've been. But don't let that stuff fool you into thinking that it will be easy, because it won't be. Even if you're in the world's most flexible workplace, it's hard. Because guess what? Kids are not flexible. Kids don't need their parents on working timelines. Kids don't get ill and in childcare and school need to be picked up at the times that suit you. Deliveroo is a UK-based business. I'm on the phone most nights, back to London. At the same time as trying to manage putting my 3 kids to bed with my wife. So look, I don't appear too negative, but it's possible, but it's hard, and no one should fool themselves into thinking it's easy. Is that a fair answer?
Yeah, thank you, and I empathise with that. It is hard, and we've known each other for a long time, and I've lost count of how many times we've caught up, formally or informally, and I don't think a time that when we catch up goes by without you emailing me that night or texting me a link to a book, to a podcast, to a quote. You're obviously a prolific reader and learner. What have been some of the perhaps influences you've had from not necessarily leaders that you've had, but other influences from around that have helped shape you? And with that, who do you out there look to as someone, as a form of inspiration that you can just draw upon when you're hitting a weak moment?
Well, let me answer the question a couple of different ways. The advice I would give to people on all this topic of learning and reading and all of that, I heard a great quote the other day. He said, this individual said, people read books, but then they don't open themselves up and read the book on the inside, because doing that's real learning. And so I think, I would encourage people, avoid, with all due respect, avoid the airport bookshop books that are, the 5 tips to leadership or the 5 ways to improve your entrepreneurial brand. I mean, if that's what you're into, fine, but I don't see the value. You got to read something that really stops you and makes you think. I'll talk about 2 specifics. I brought one here today to talk about. The first one that's not this one is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. It's written by a Roman emperor, notes to himself while he was on the Germanic front. Was it never actually, historians think, never actually written to ever be a book that anyone else would read. So these are notes that he wrote for himself to read, to think about life. And it's all about Stoic philosophy and what you control and not sweating the things that you don't control. So it's a short book, and I would encourage everyone, the best thing you could ever do, it might cost you $10, buy a copy of that. Don't read it cover to cover, but just every so often pick it up, because it will make you think about life and being a leader. Second one is here. So I heard about this on another podcast. The book is The Path to Leadership by Field Marshal Montgomery, otherwise known as Montgomery of Alamein. This is a profound read. Let me tell you, I'm going to read you a passage from this.
Really?
Yeah.
Who gave it to you?
I bought it.
Who told you about it?
I heard about it on another podcast.
Right.
Yes.
And by the look of it, he went back in time to buy it.
Boys, you can joke now, but when I read... Montgomery was commander of the Allied ground forces in the Second World War. So his team was over 1 million people. Just think about that for a minute. So I think he's got a couple of interesting things to say about leadership. Now, this book came out in 1960. He himself had some controversial opinions on different things. But I think I'll read this passage to you, because if this doesn't stop you and make you think, Chris, something's wrong, but I'm sure it will. So the passage is called Advice to a Leader. Now, it's all written in, it's about him, not her. This was written in 1960, so I'll read it as it is, but just bear that in mind. So advice to a leader. What advice can be offered to a leader? He must discipline himself and lead a carefully regulated and ordered life. He must allow a certain amount of time for quiet thought and reflection. The best times are in the early morning and in the evening. The quality, good or bad, of any action which is to be taken will vary directly with the amount of time spent in thinking. Against this, he must not be rigid. His decisions and plans must be adaptable to changing situations. A certain ruthlessness is essential, particularly with inefficiency, and also with those who would waste his time. I like this bit in particular that's coming. People will accept this, provided the leader is ruthless with himself. Then he must have a dogged perseverance, perhaps tenacity is a better word. Having decided on his policy, his objective, he must not be led off his target by the faint-hearted. He will do well to discard the faint-hearted once they are discovered. There are always those men who are dissatisfied, not so much with their own littleness as with the bigness of other people. Such men are incapable of trying to better their own positions except by the relative method of dragging down their more fortunate comrades, planning to pull down rather than build up. Most leaders will find there is so much to do and so little time to do it. That was my experience in the military sphere. My answer to that is not to worry. What is needed is a quiet contemplation of all aspects of the problem, followed by a decision, and it is fatal to worry afterwards. Now, I think that is something anybody can sit down if you've got a spare 10 minutes with a glass of red, Chris, on a Saturday night and read that and stop, put the phone away, put Instagram away, no distractions. Just think about what was written in 1960 and how profound that is. A lot of those things he's written about, you'll find rehashed in the airport on the 4 tips about how to be a leader. But there's original thinking. And I read that and I just stopped and I thought that is absolutely profound. Be ruthless. People will accept it as long as you're ruthless with yourself. Never look back, no regrets. What Montgomery is talking about is setting a standard for yourself on how you behave and how you execute, and then holding yourself to that standard. And if you hold yourself to that standard, then everyone else can be held to the same standard and people will accept that. The leader has to, set the bar and raise the bar for how everyone else should behave.
I have no doubt that after this podcast goes out into the world, we are going to be inundated with people wanting to work for you at Deliveroo. What do you ask them? How do you get to the bottom of who they are, why they're right, and what they can bring to the business? What sort of line of questioning do you usually take?
Look, firstly, I'm not very good at it. I think it's tremendously difficult to get to the bottom of a person in an interview, because it's a false scenario, and obviously you two are very skilled at it. I don't think it's a strength of mine. And certainly as if I look back over the years, I've had some people who I thought through the interview process were good, who've turned out to be superstars. And I've had some people who I thought would be superstars who've turned out to be good. But it's difficult to pick it. I don't have a set line of questions. I usually wait for an opening. Whatever it is, there'll always be an opening, and then I just throw a bit of a curveball to see what happens. And I don't mean that to be mean or anything like that, but just you'll see something, and there'll be an opportunity to ask a from left field question.
Can you give us one of your left field questions?
I'm not giving away my tricks, particularly to you. But no, it'll be something about, someone will say something about, and this happened in that particular situation, and I'll know, hang on now, in that industry that you were talking about, I'm not so sure if that's actually right. I mean, I saw something on the news there a month ago about, whatever it might be, the automotive industry. So I'll just sort of throw something in about that to see what they say. I mean, I'll sometimes, if I see the candidate is nervous, I'll just say, look, you're doing well. You don't need to be nervous. Because, I mean, we've all been there, right? It's difficult. Of course people are nervous. You get in, it's a fake situation. There's a bit of pressure. If you can just take the nervousness away and get to know the real person. That's key.
I mean, culture is obviously a pretty broad topic. So it's a two-part question. How do you come in and make your mark on a really established culture? But part B, how do you come in and fix a broken culture?
So I think the first thing is it depends whether you're an internal promotion or an external hire. And I've been both. I think your approach varies because in the former, you are part of that culture, of course. And hopefully it doesn't need dramatic change because if it does, you're probably doing something wrong. In the latter, you're coming out from outside the organisation. It's probably easier to make dramatic change. And look, I'm not coming from a place of having got this right all the time. If I was to look back, there's things I'd do differently. But I think the best approach is to be pretty swift, pretty decisive and honest and say, here's my opinions around the way we need to act at work, which is culture really. Here's where we are today. Here's what needs to change. And I'm asking you to change. And honestly, if you don't want to change, that's fine because you don't want people, just as individuals, we talked about family before. I mean, no one comes to work to be a bad person, I'm convinced, and to disrupt a culture and not contribute. I think all people want to come to work and contribute to a positive culture and do a good job. But sometimes where you're going and the individuals that are there are not necessarily compatible. And if that's the case, it's an honest conversation to say, look, this is where I'm taking the business. I feel it's important for these reasons. Do you want to be there with me? Honestly, because if you don't, that's okay, and we can have a conversation about what that looks like. But what you don't want people to be doing is sitting there a bit unhappy for themselves as well as the business. And so, sometimes maybe in this world we get hung up on PowerPoints and concentric circles with the why and all that stuff in it. Sometimes just have an honest conversation about this is the reality of the world and do you want to be there or not?
So Ed, things were going really well for you at Meridian at the time. You had a great relationship with the head office over in Wellington. You were sitting over a business that was growing and performing. The culture was fantastic, high level of engagement, and now you're at Deliveroo. Why'd you go? What walk us through that move and why? And
it's a good question, Chris, now that you put it like that, but no, I'm joking. Look, always have a bit of an itch, and I don't like being comfortable for long. And then Deliveroo came along and I thought, wow, great brand, interesting sector, food is exciting, we eat 3 times a day, Australians are passionate about food, conversation starter, and food delivery is today a tiny part of the overall food market. And I thought that's a good opportunity and I should have a look. And I did have a look. And the people I met in both the local business and the global business I liked. And for those reasons, I'm just someone who when I say moves forward, I don't mean that in any way that in the context of where I've come from, Meridian was a great business, but it was just too good an opportunity for me from an excitement point of view to challenge myself. As soon as the gap was there, I was always going through it even though I was kidding myself at one point. I'm not sure about this. It was always going to happen.
So what's in store for us with Deliveroo? What can we expect over the next number of years?
You'll see a lot of growth for Deliveroo and the category. We work with 8,000 riders and at 14,000 restaurant partners. You'll see more and more innovation in that sector. Look, it's pretty tough to be in small business in Australia at the moment. It's pretty tough to run a restaurant. Everyone knows wherever they live, restaurants that are there are not the restaurants that were there 10 years ago. There are all sorts of reasons for that. And we'll be working harder to partner with those restaurants on their menu options so they can improve margin. There's a whole bunch of tactics around that. But generally, the sector will evolve for a whole bunch of reasons. And we'd like to be part of that. One day, Chris, you might be ordering your breakfast, lunch and dinner from Deliveroo. It's very interesting. I was speaking with someone this week who gave the example. We've become very impatient. You think back to 20 years ago, where you went, or 25 years ago, where you went to get information. You wanted to learn about a particular topic while you were at university. What did you do?
Library.
Which took hours. Today, what do you do?
Google.
And you expect everything immediately. So consumer expectations are increasing all the time. It's about transparency. So if we tell you, you're ordering whatever food at this moment and it'll be off-peak time, 20 minutes. Peak time might be 35. Within reason, as long as it's delivered in the time we've said, people are happy. What's unacceptable is to say 25 minutes and it arrives in 50 minutes. That's the more important thing, rather than the absolute time we tell you. It's as quick as possible, but the practicalities are the food needs to be cooked, needs to be fresh, needs to be picked up, needs to be delivered. You can see a future world where it might be quicker, but it's always going to be in the tens of minutes, I would think.
I mean, you're starting a new job now. How do you kind of filter out all the operational noise when you join a business and there's lots of ideas and legacy things and priorities getting thrown at you left, right and centre? How do you filter all that out and distill what's really important?
It's more difficult now than it used to be. I read about Arsene Wenger, the former Arsenal manager, said leadership is harder today because we've gone from a world of vertical leadership where you have a manager and an employee and one follows the other, to horizontal leadership where everyone has an opinion with social media, internet, etc. In the work context, we used to have email. If I go back to the Glaxo days, we used to have email, and I forget what it was called, but there was an internal messaging service where people from Glaxo Australia could message each other.
It was Lotus Notes, wasn't it?
So I think you might be right.
Lotus Notes, yeah.
And now you've got email, you've got Slack. So take Deliveroo, now we've got Slack, but it's Slack for everyone globally. So you can message somebody or get on a chat with a group from all over the world. And we've got Workplace, another internal communication system. So people now are being continuously bombarded with communication, both internally and externally. The volume of information and noise, the volume of information has gone up an order of magnitude, right? And within that, there's huge noise. So filtering out the noise, I think today is harder than it used to be. But in the end, there are only really two things you need to think about when you're new to a business. One, what are the 4 or 5 key levers that drive this business, right? In terms of, is it volume? Is it margin? Cost? What are those key things? And 2, what are the characteristics and behaviors of people that are required in people to move the business? That's the internal stuff, and externally, of course, you got to know about what customers want and how your channels work, but you got to limit it down, and I think that is part of the skill, dismissing all that other noise, particularly early on.
Once you've got your vision and your plan in place, how do you sell that to the business, so to the board, to the exec, and to everyone who's following you along on that journey?
Well, that probably is the definition of leadership. Selling a vision, if to use that word, or a story, and saying, look, here's where we're going. It's undoubtedly hard. And you're trying to convince people to get there in a way that in the absence of that leadership, they wouldn't. But of course, the key is to develop other leaders within the organization. That's probably one of the most important things. And have honest conversations about the challenges and the opportunity that brings. Because with challenge comes big opportunity for people to learn and for people to grow as individuals and on their career paths.
So Ed, you are where you are, obviously accomplished, very early 40s, still a long way to go for your career. But knowing what you know now at 41, if you were to go back 20 years and give yourself 3 or 4 bits of advice, knowing what you know now, what would it be? Or what would you do differently?
I'd advise people to be broader.
What advice for you?
Right.
What advice would you give your younger
I'd
self?
give myself, think more broadly. So I go back 20 years, I thought I wanted to be I was a scientist. And I thought that's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then things changed because an opportunity came up to join GlaxoSmithKline, and I thought, well, hang on, that sounds interesting. But I was probably in the early years, very early years, a little narrow-minded on where my career would go. So I'd advise myself just think a bit more broad earlier. I think as you get older, you get a bit wiser and you start to realize that the world's a complicated place and things happen and bad things happen to people. And so, it's that famous kind of line that, whenever you see somebody who's, I forget the line, but basically the concept is you see someone behaving in a particular way, remember that they've got a whole bunch of things going on in their lives in the background. And I think when you're 20, sometimes you don't recognize that. And you see someone in work who's maybe not performing or whatever, and you think, what's going on? When you're 40-something, you're a bit wiser and well, hang on, maybe, they've just lost a parent, to use an example. And I've lost a parent, so I know what it's like now. And it's tough, and it's you don't wake up the day after and you're fine. It takes months. So I think with a bit of age and wisdom, that stuff comes. And I know for some people that stuff comes earlier, but for me, I was not a wise 20-year-old. So that's something I'd tell myself. Just remember that people have got stuff going on, and what you see is not what you get necessarily, because what you're not seeing is a whole world of things.
What was the most challenging the most confronting bit of feedback that you've ever received? What hit you between the eyes?
The country manager of Glaxo at the time was Deborah Waterhouse, who was a very, very inspirational leader, very, very successful. She was my mentor. And it was a particular situation. The details don't matter, but...
Should we stop the camera?
No, it's fine.
No, keep going.
That's fine.
Keep going.
But anyone who was there will remember. But anyway, this particular thing happened. It was all to do with who was hiring who, and there were all these different roles, and we were all basically fighting over talent. And I remember she said to me afterwards, Ed, you lost control of that situation. And she gave me this bit of feedback, which people who listen to this who work for me are going to laugh, because I give this feedback all the time to others. I said, she said to me, Ed, you don't always have to be the first one to talk. And in fact, sometimes you're better off to sit there with your mouth shut and say nothing. Just let it all play out in front of you. Just let everyone else talk. Just sit there and say nothing. And then towards the end, make your point. And I was guilty in those years. This is probably 10 or 12 years ago, I guess, but of wanting to be straight in with the opinion. This is what's happening. In the front door all the time, kick the door down, get everyone out of the way. Here's what's happening. And there might be a few casualties along the way, but whatever, I'll get the outcome I want. But, her feedback was, pretty straight. Hey, there are other ways to do it. Come in the side door, climb in the window. But just I'm joking about that, but just, be a bit, the word she used at the time was be statesman-like. Just sometimes, John F. Kennedy, let them all talk about the potential outcome, the potential route to an outcome for the Cuban Missile Crisis. One lot wants to bomb the place, one lot doesn't. Kennedy just sat there and let them all talk, and in the end, sorted it out. Cool head.
Back to your day role as a dad, husband, CEO. Do you sleep well at night? Do you wake up 3 a.m.? Do you worry about things?
No, well, look, as you know, I've got 3 kids, including an 8-month-old, so I don't sleep well at night because he's up. But put that aside, and he's not a great sleeper. Hopefully he listens to this one day. So we're up for that reason. But in general, do I sleep well? Not really. What I find is if I wake up, if I go back 15 years, I would have slept through every night. What happens now is if I wake up for whatever reason, and I describe it as like my mind's like an engine piston. If it just gets one turnover, that's it, it's gone, and I can't get back to sleep. And sometimes, the kids will wake and I'll walk through the house saying to myself, don't let those thoughts come in. Don't start thinking about the P&L. Don't start thinking about that particular person. And if I can shut that all out, I'll go back to sleep. But if one rotation of the engine happens, it's gone. I won't sleep again. Particularly if it's after 3. If it's before 3, maybe. But that's, that's just the way it is. And I sometimes, it's interesting over the years how many times I've been in a room, as you have, I'm sure, with groups of others, with the butcher's paper and, coming up with ideas and innovation and all that stuff. And if, you have Post-it notes on your butcher's paper, then you're agile. That's real cool. Coming up with ideas. And what comes out of 99.99% of those sessions is nothing. The only time I've had the rare good idea, I've been on my own. I've been going for a run, or I've been reading something, or I've been watching something and something happens, nothing related to it. And I think, oh, gee, that's interesting what he's saying there about, the latest Rugby World Cup incident that happened or whatever. Oh, it's quite interesting. How could I apply that at work? And then I'll bring it. Then I'll come in and I'll say to somebody, "I have this idea. What do you think?" And something will come of that. But in general, so my mind's pretty active, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But clearly, not sleeping at night is. There's a balance.
So how is every night?
No.
How many times a week?
3 or 4.
Right, that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But look, if you're going to run a business, if you're going to run a serious business, don't kid yourself that you'll sleep well at night.
Do you sleep well at night?
No, I'm up 3 a.m. too. I was up 3 a.m. this morning, but we're not just talking about us. We're also talking about all the other executives out there, male and female.
If there are executives out there who sleep well at night, I really take my hat off to them. That's great. But I've not met one who does.
Is it sustainable long term for us to, or for you to, 4 out of the 5 nights during the week, you're up at 3 a.m., you probably go to bed late, and over a long period of time without consistent sleep, vitality, for you to be operating at the highest of
I think it is sustainable, but you need to take breaks. And you need to, some mornings go in a bit late.
Do you do that?
No, but I'm talking about give advice to other people here, Chris. Look, I'm not to be held up as an example of how you should be. I've had a little bit of success, but it's come at a cost. And if there are other people out there who manage to balance it all, I really congratulate them, and they should be the ones on the next podcast. but I've found it difficult. I'll tell you what I have got a lot better at is I get home, excuse me, I get home in the evening, I put my phone onto silent and I put it over there in the corner. And then we'll have dinner and if there's a text or a message or emails, I don't look at it until later on, after the kids are in the bath or in bed. But I used to be, I'd have my phone underneath the table or I'd be getting up to check it every few minutes. So I've become disciplined at that.
I've tried doing that myself,
Have
but
you?
if I ignore it for too long, Chris actually turns up in my driveway.
Or I ring his wife, Sally. Is Husey home? If it's any consolation, obviously Chris and I spend a lot of time with senior leaders, not just CEOs, but people that work for CEOs. Mm-hmm. And this conversation comes up around pressure management and are you sleeping at night? And I recognise that there's phases through business where you need to work extra long hours and burn the midnight oil and have the 3 a.m. wake-up call because there's a transformation. We're about to win a deal, proposal. But I feel strongly about this. If it's a consistent pattern over a long period of time, it has. I feel it has significant impact on vitality, and mental health is part of vitality. Physical health, relationships, and being the best leader you can actually be. So I don't know what the answer is, but the pressure out there for leaders like you and leaders that work for you and the level below is very real. And I do feel that there's a lot of people suffering out there in silence.
Oh, sure. And I think two responses to that. One is perhaps the more harsh one. It's a choice. Ben Burge, another very strong leader that I worked for, always used to say, slavery went out 200 years ago. And he's right. You don't have to do it. There are plenty of other options.
I think we get Ben Burge in next, Chris.
Done. Ben, if you're listening, we're down at the Espy.
Yeah,
Come down now.
We're down for lunch. We're about to order.
We're having Deliveroo. But the other, you mentioned another very important point on vitality and mental health and suffering in silence. People should not suffer in silence. There's all sorts of people I talk to help me be better. Australia and the world has come a long, long way in terms of openness about mental health. I listened to an interview a while back. Alistair Campbell was Tony Blair's former communications director. Very, very tough, high-profile job during those Blair years. They won 3 elections. And he himself has had a battle with mental illness and depression. And he's also written a very interesting book, another book I'd recommend called Winners, where he interviews politicians, sports people, people in business, all who have been successful and talks about the characteristics. But as part of all that, he said, why is it that every AFL player or football player or rugby league player, rugby union, would have regular access to a sports psychologist? It's just normal. It's just what happens. Yet there still is, to a certain extent, although a fraction of what there used to be, a stigma about someone in the corporate world putting their hand up around, hey, I'm seeing a psychologist. I've got mental illness challenges. There's still an element of taboo about that. And, that's got to be completely taken apart. The recent tragic passing of Danny Frawley. There was an example, I think we may have spoken about this, where Danny, just after he died, there was an interview on TV with Gary Lyne and what's the guy who used to play for Hawthorn? In Brereton's era, the other forward.
Jason Dunstall.
Dunstall.
Yeah. The pig.
And Dunstall said They were talking about mental illness. And look, I've never met Jason Dunstall, so, all this is to be caveated with that. But he's talking about mental illness, and he said, it's a disease I'll never understand. I'll just never understand it. And I thought, well, you know what? That's actually adding to the stigma. What do you mean you don't understand it? It's like saying you don't. I mean, it's almost sort of. And look, I'm not saying this is what he meant. I'm sure it's not what he meant, because it was a very heartfelt interview. So, I'm not saying Dunstall in any way was deliberately doing this, but I thought those words were. Someone might listen to them and interpret, well, he's saying, I'll never understand that disease. It's almost towards the line of, it's not a real disease. It's kind of like a thing in people's minds. I mean, no, that's not true. It's a real disease with biological origins, same as diabetes has a biological origin, same as cancer has a biological origin. But you don't hear people sort of talk about diabetes, I just don't understand it. No, it's just biology. You might not understand it, but it's a real thing. So anyway, we've covered a bit of ground there, but I think suffering in silence should be less today. We ran big mental health programs at Meridian, and we will do at Deliveroo.
We're going to change tact for just one moment. You mentioned agile before and the sticky notes. I'm curious on your thoughts around is agile a fad? Is it kind of a Band-Aid solution for maybe what might be the real problem within an organisation?
In some cases, agile is used as a bit of a fad and a bit of a tick box exercise to say, here we're going to do things differently now, so here's agile. We'll all have stand-ups and we'll move post-it cards around and whatever. But actually, nothing really changes. Because that doesn't address some fundamental issues that we can talk about. And I think certainly, go back to when I was at REA Group, 2011. That's when people were talking about agile, but before that even. So it's not a new thing. But in some circles, it is new. And so, agile won't solve your problems. And if you talk, I think, to some of the very early proponents of that way of thinking, they would say where it's gone in a direction now where it's become its own. Someone described it as the agile industrial complex. There's a whole industry now around agile.
How do you encourage a culture of risk-taking?
Okay, Chris, how much money do you think you would have to lose on an initiative or a tactic or an idea for me to be upset?
I went for a really big number in my head.
No, I'll tell you, I ran this exercise with a board of an organisation a while back. They asked me to come and give a talk. I won't say which one it is. And it was the exec and the board members. And I said to them, right, get out a bit of paper. All of you write down on the paper, on a piece of paper, an amount of money. The amount of money is the amount of money that you think the CEO who's sitting there would go to the chair who's sitting there and be just quite nervous, but not like awake 7 times at night, but nervous about having a conversation to say, hey, Chris, we tried this idea, it didn't work, and we've torched $15,000. What's the amount of money? Because if it's like, to take it extreme, if it's $1, well, there's not going to be a discussion. If there's $500, if it's 1,000, it's probably, immaterial. If it's 250 million, to go the other extreme, it's very material. What's the number? And the interesting thing with this exec and board, they wrote down their numbers and I gathered them all up and looked at them. There was massive variation. So in that organization, they hadn't agreed where is the risk tolerance financially. Now, it's a fake, made-up exercise and example. But I think you've got to be very clear with teams and employees about where and when you want them to take risk and what magnitude. Clearly safety, no. Clearly reputational issues. I gave ACCC as the example, but that's just one example. No. In any business I'm in, it's no. You could argue whether that's the same elsewhere. And financial.
Ed, we've asked you a lot of questions. Anything you want to ask us?
As Chris, I think, pointed out earlier, a lot of ongoing change always in organizations. what are some of the characteristics of the people that either of you see in the people that deal with that most effectively?
I think you covered it off in the Montgomery example. What I took out of that, and you had shared that with me before, is leaders take a long-term view. I find there's a lot of short-termism involved at the moment that breeds different types of behaviours. Leading by example came out of that topic there. So you can't ask someone to do something unless you're prepared to do it yourself. So that to me is really important. Hughesy?
The sign of a good leader is someone who knows exactly in 3 years, 5 years' time what they're going to walk away from the opportunity that they've chosen to embrace, and what story they're going to be able to tell at the end of that. They've got to be crystal clear on are they measuring themselves against soft metrics, or are they measuring themselves against the metrics that are actually going to shift the dial for the business? Because it's very easy to get caught up in the nice, warm and fuzzy stuff, but understanding how to actually shift the commercial needle in a business is much, much harder.
I think to add to that, the best leaders are highly self-aware. They know they don't have the answers to everything, and they surround themselves with people that have the answers, are not afraid to show vulnerability. It's okay for a leader to say, I don't know, but I'll find out, and they know where to look. And leaders to be pragmatic and focus on the tasks that they can actually control, because we do see lots of people in leadership positions get impacted by variables they can't control, and that has then the cultural impact. And it's a topic that is very dear to us, leadership and high performance, and I feel strongly about this. For someone to be operating at their highest capacity, they need to have full vitality, and they didn't need to sleep 8 hours at night, Ed.
Thanks. I'll bear that in mind. I've got another question for you guys.
Please.
That everyone who listens to this will be happy that I ask. Because your business is about identifying the best talent, the best leaders, technical capability, whatever their brief is. What is the one question you both go to in interviewing people, the killer question that uncovers the most about the person in front of you? What's the Chris Karagunis, Chris Hughes secret sauce?
Yep, I can answer that one pretty easily. It's the first question that I ask, and it comes in a few different forms, but I deliberately leave it to be incredibly vague, and I start with something like, so where did it all begin? And people stop for a moment, and the reaction and the answers that I get to that question tell me everything I need to know about a person. So on one end of the scale, we will have the really transactional person who just kind of wants to get in and out as quickly as possible. And they'll go, well, why don't I just tell you about what I'm doing now? And they'll go on and they'll talk about their role, and we go down that path. Then there's the other end of the scale where they go, well, I actually came from a small town 20 miles outside of Dublin, which is, I think, how you started your story. I can't remember. But the people who think about heritage, who realise where they've come from, who realise the journey that they've been on and where they're going, and the kind of impact that people have had on them and the impact that they're going to have on people, they always start their story way back then. Where did you come from? What is your DNA, and what has shaped you? Because the people with the best stories don't shortchange their stories by just talking about what they did last week.
Ed, I don't think I have a one question. My view is that every single person is different. I've never met the same person twice. And I find that from a recruit or a headhunter's perspective, or HR, when they're asking questions, sometimes the easy questions, the questions that are easy to ask, are actually really hard to answer. So what I like doing when I meet someone for the first time, I just like asking, how are you? How's your day going? And it gives them an opportunity to kind kind of articulate what's important for them at the time, whether it's going back to the start or what they've done today. But it's also an opportunity for them to engage me. I've lost count of how many times I've asked people, how are you? And they'll tell me. And then they'll keep telling me and keep telling me and keep telling me. And you know what they forget to ask?
How are you?
How am I? I know so much about them, but they know nothing about me. So that actually tells me about how they're going to engage people internally in an organisation. You know, it's important to be interesting, but you've got to be interested as well. Otherwise, how are you going to collaborate? How are you going to get a transformation over the line? So I like asking that question just to see how they answer it, but also how they'll engage me. And how they engage me is how they'll engage their colleagues or their leaders or their whatever. I also like asking, so where are you headed? Where's the compass pointed? I don't like asking, what do you want to be in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, or what do you want to be when you grow up? You get an engineered answer like that. But when you ask and this is the question I ask, where's the compass pointed? And really what you're testing there is this person's horizon 2, 3, 4 on where their career's going and why they're going in that direction. What challenges are they after? And it demonstrates to whoever's interviewing that they've carefully thought through where they're going, what their strengths are, why they want to get there. Because often people put their hand up for the next job because it's the next job. It's the next one up. Because the system conditions us to, I start as a manager, then I become a senior manager, then I become a very senior manager. Whereas for us, a career isn't vertical. A career can be like snakes and ladders even sometimes. You hit a spot, then you go down again. You've got to work your way up. So me personally, I like asking open-ended questions to see how they respond. And sometimes I like asking controversial questions. Like during election time, I'll always ask, who do you think is going to win? And that throws people. I'm not asking who they're going to vote for. And often people get stumped and think I'm asking that question because I don't care. But what I'm measuring is their ability to answer a question addressing both sides of the room. Because that's what happens in corporate all the time. There's always people in corporate that are believing in a direction or not believing in a direction. And it's the leadership person or the best leader that's able to address both sides of the room and give a balanced view on where they're going to go.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I've had colleagues or friends going for an interview elsewhere, they've asked me, how should I prepare? What should I do? I always say, whatever you do, as you walk into the room, start a conversation about something. You know, have a look at what the news is that morning and just have 2 or 3 things, whatever it is. When you walk in there, you see a book on the coffee table or you know, it's just something. Or if there's nothing there and nothing catches you, just say, I just read about that speech that, Julia Gillard gave. That was quite interesting. Did you see that? You know, and that one breaks the ice and lowers the nerves. 2 just sends a signal that you're a curious, interesting person.
That's good advice.
What's the interview question that makes you cringe, that you've either heard of or been asked yourself?
Oh, look, the behavioural style questions, which luckily I haven't had in years, but can you tell us about a time where you were faced with a particular challenge regarding, a lower performing colleague or some rubbish, and you have to kind of think, well, this is what happened and then we did this. I mean, it's just not real. Well, I don't know actually how much that happens anymore, but in the early days for me, I was, told this will be a behavioural style interview. So you go away and you start thinking of your examples and the behaviours. I mean, it's just all so scripted and terrible. I mean, really, is the person got the capability to do the job, yes or no? You should probably know that before they even get into the interview. Do they want to do the job? Do they want to be here? Are they a curious, interesting person that will add to the team dynamic?
What motivates you? What excites you when you get up in the morning after having no sleep?
It's not that bad, by the way. I think
You said 4 nights.
but some of those nights I'll get back to sleep.
But you wake up in the morning, you clap your hands together, and you're a naturally optimistic person, right?
Yep,
So,
yep.
What are you looking forward to?
I want to win. I'm a competitive person. I was never very good at sport. So I had 2 left feet, and I had to work very, very hard to be average. Right? So, but I was quite competitive, but I just wasn't any good. And I'll compete on anything. And to a certain extent, business is a competition. It is. You've got competitors. You're not trying to, it's not war. You're not trying to wipe those people out or anything. And it should never be compared directly to that, although sometimes it is. So I think just the sense of winning, the sense of a challenge, and then I think creating an environment where people can develop and move in an area that they want to move, and if that's the next job up, or it's the next job sideways, or it's the current job they're in, but being more fulfilled in that job. Any of those options, but I think it's about letting and creating an environment where good people succeed. That is very, very motivating for me, along with winning.
And on that note, I'd like to thank Ed McManus, the incoming CEO of Deliveroo, and Chris Karagounis, managing partner of Alex Kaar, for our very first, but hopefully not our very last, podcast at the beautiful podcast studio here at the Esplanade in sunny downtown St Kilda. Thank you, Ed, for your contribution.
Thanks, Chris.
There was fantastic. I think we've got a good sense, even a better sense of who you are and what makes you tick. And all the best for the future. And we hope to see you again real soon.
Indeed. Cheers.
Eddie.